Hello, everyone. If I could get you to take your seats, please. Grab some coffee, get breakfast if you haven't already. Oh, anyway, yes. All right. Oh, thank you, thank you. Yes. Excellent. Right. Wonderful. Oh, right. Yeah, grab the last minute coffee, last hugs and hellos. Well, thank you, everybody. Good morning. It is good to see all of you here today in person, and also to our friends joining us on Zoom virtually. This is a talk about digital transformation generally, and so it makes sense to have a hybrid component and make this event as accessible as possible. My name is Mahan Kulasegaram. I am the co-chair of the Hodges Day Committee with my fellow co-chair Joanne Goldman and the rest of the Hodges Day Committee. We'd like to welcome you to another wonderful event on this beautiful May morning. Before I go any further, I'm going to ask one of our STAR PhD students, Abhi Ramdawar, to come up and offer the land acknowledgement.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today and a privilege to share today's land acknowledgement. Over the past few years, land acknowledgements have become a more common practice, and at times they can feel routine and even performative. So today, I want to gently disrupt that pattern by beginning with a moment of reflection on my own journey to this land we gather on. My parents came to Canada as teenagers in the 1980s from the Caribbean in hopes of building a better life for our family. I was born and raised in Canada, and through them, I learned about the Indigenous peoples from Trinidad and Tobago, which is where my parents are from. Long before Spanish and British colonization, the land was home to the Amerindian peoples, including the Caribs, the Taino, and the Arawakan communities, who were once widely connected across the Caribbean and South America. Many of us might already be familiar with their living legacies. If you've ever enjoyed the nutty taste of cassava, or also commonly known as yuca, or if you have relaxed in the gentle sway of a hammock, or listen to the vibrant rhythms of our maracas instrument. And in case you don't know what a maracas instrument is, this is what it looks like. You've experienced knowledge and traditions passed down from Indigenous peoples from that land and that region. And what we see is that across the world, we continue to see how Indigenous knowledge systems center on generosity, knowledge sharing, co-creation, medicinal innovation and collaboration, and principles that transcends borders and generations. And for Indigenous peoples from around the world joining us today, we welcome you. And for those whose ancestors were brought to this land against their will, we hold space for you as well. And in that same spirit, we acknowledge the land on which we gather here today. The University Health Network and the University of Toronto operates on the land that has been a site for human activity over 15,000 years. This is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As a PhD student and fellow at the Wilson Centre and at the University of Toronto, over the past 5 years, many of us have had the incredible privilege of engaging with Indigenous health research methodologies. This approach emphasizes respect, relationality, reciprocity, responsibility, and community-based participatory research. They offer ways of seeing, knowing that are essential not only for building meaningful relationship, but also challenging assumptions and making truths unfamiliar, and opening space for innovation, creativity, and a more equitable solution within our healthcare system. For this knowledge and for the opportunity to learn, unlearn, and to grow within the space of exchange, I am deeply grateful. It's with sincere thanks we honor the Indigenous peoples across Canada, their generosity, their knowledge, and their enduring spirit in teaching us how to care for these relationships and steward these resources with intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. That was very great. I enjoyed hearing about your personal reflection as well. Next, I'd like to invite the director of the Wilson Center, Dr. Cynthia Whitehead. She's a scientist and professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine and holds the BMO chair at UHN.
Thank you, Mahan, and lovely to see everyone here in person, and welcome to everyone also online. This Hodges Symposium is named in honor of Dr. Brian Hodges, who always makes it clear that he is still alive and well, and and very much a major presence in the life of the Wilson Center, UHN, the university, and education globally. So we are delighted to have this event named in your honor, Brian, with you here as in our midst and contributing to our things. I think that the thanks to the whole Hodges Symposium committee, Mahan and Joanne in particular, although Cheryl, without Cheryl's support, none of this would have happened. So Cheryl, I'm glad you walked into that. And Jane has also provided a lot of support. So without the incredible staff of the Wilson Center, we would do nothing. So thank you to you both. It's very prescient of the Hodges Day Steering Committee to have chosen this topic this week. I mean, you can't turn a corner without running into conversations about AI in a more disruptive way. Abby, we know the Wilson Center is disruptive about many things. Good disruptive, productive disruption, and from the Vatican to commencement and convocation exercises across North America, there's a lot of questioning going on this week. So the Harvard president, Alan Garber, in their commencement exercises, spoke about the great consternation in 1903 about the tethered hot air balloons that were taking people up to look over the Alps in a mere 10 minutes. And look down, he said, with disdain, from quoting someone from 1903, on the alpinists, the people who climbed the mountains, working hard to get there. And so he was reflecting on what technologies do and to what extent we choose to use those technologies and when we need to do the work ourselves. So when do we need to do that work? And when is technology a useful aid? When we use technologies, what do we lose? So I think that is a good place to begin some of these discussions, and I will turn it back to Mahan to introduce our speakers.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Cynthia. And I also heard that the part of the UHN strategic plan is to make a digital avatar of Brian, so he never goes away. You can always consult him, Brian GPT. Yeah. And let me also echo the thanks to Cheryl, Jane, and the rest of the Hodges Day Committee for bringing this event together and suggesting our speakers. As Cynthia mentioned, today's event is about digital compassion, digital learning, and also connecting those areas or loci of transformation to the work that we do at the Wilson Center through a theoretical lens grounded in the disciplines of education and the disciplines that inform education. So I hope you'll have a wonderful time hearing about both the bedside, but also the laboratory, the archive, and how those things will intersect in informing the work that we do in enhancing health professions education. To support this, we're delighted to be joined by some wonderful speakers today. And just to give you an orientation, what's going to happen is that I'm going to introduce the first two speakers. Actually, I'll introduce all of them, but the first two speakers will present. And they will be followed by a break, a chance for a Q&A and a break. And then after that, we will complete the talk with the other two speakers joining. So I'm delighted that our first speaker is Brianna Layard. She's a registered nurse with a clinical background in general medicine, cardiology, and clinical trials. She has a master's in health sciences and health administration from U of T and is currently one of the 2025 AMS Fitzgerald Fellows in Human-Centered Leadership in AI. So we're very fortunate to have her expertise on this issue. She is the current clinical lead for research in AI within the Peter Munk Cardiac Center AI team, and she's focusing on the development and deployment of responsible and sustainable AI-enabled tools that are clinically informed. Following Brianna's presentation, we're going to be joined by Dr. David Wilger. Many of you will know him as a Wilson Center scientist and a longtime member of the UHN community, leading UA10 Digital. He is the current CPD Associate Dean at the Temerity Faculty of Medicine. And we're very fortunate to have his sort of connections bridging the hospital and the academic side. After which, we'll have Dr. Nikki Woods and Dr. Cynthia Whitehead in person. Dr. Nikki Woods is the Curry Chair at UHN. She's a scientist at the Wilson Center and the scientific lead for TIER, and a scientist in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. And completing the talk today will be Dr. Cynthia Whitehead, who you've already met as the Wilson Center Director and the BMO Chair. So please join me in welcoming Brianna Layard to the front.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Honored to be here. A little surprised when I got asked, but happy to bring, a nursing and a frontline and a bit more of a research lens from that perspective to the group. So just going to be touching on digital transformation through a nursing lens, really focusing on AI given my current work. So to kind of ground my perspective, in society, I identify as a zillennial, which is defined as a group that's experienced mostly offline childhoods, unplugged, but entering adulthood, we really did so alongside high-speed internet and smartphones, which means sometimes I resonate with millennials, sometimes I resonate more Gen Z, but it describes people who have this real appreciation for offline, understand the full spectrum of what a workflow used to be and could be and is now. And kind of reflecting and making this talk today, I think pretty much everyone in this room has managed to have a career where we're all zillennial equivalents in healthcare. We kind of can all claim that we have touched paper charting and fax machines and things like that. So we appreciate what workflows used to be and what we loved about them, what we miss about them, but we also really appreciate the changes that have happened most recently that have brought on a lot of opportunities. So kind of to hone in on that, I'm just going to cover my nursing journey quickly to give some background. So I've touched a lot of different parts of the healthcare system so far. I've worked in a CCAC ambulatory clinic where we received handwritten referrals and faxes, but we had a really cool, innovative mobile charting system that enabled home care. I worked in inpatient acute medicine where we did completely paper charting, but we had a really cool built-out telemetry system that was not integrated with anything else in the hospital. Once I moved to outpatient cardiac care, we ran fully virtual cardiac rehab during COVID, but then did our timekeeping and our scheduling on paper. When I moved more into research roles, countless imaging, data collection, patient platforms, but also, again, an equal number of paper charts. Most recently, I am an AMS Fitzgerald Fellow, and we've gotten to really think about the human-centered evolution of digital transformation, specifically looking at AI, and it's been a really great experience so far. So in 8 years, across 3 Ontario cities, I've touched 5 electronic health records, 3 organizations that still paper charted, 2 provincial clinical viewers, countless diagnostic vendor platforms, and even more research platforms. And what I really want to emphasize here is that I don't think this is unique for nurses. I actually think this is a nurse's superpower as an end user. And my tragedy of it all is I don't think I actually realized that until I went back to U of T for my master's only 4 years into my career, but I was one of 3 nurses in the program. So I think big missed opportunity where I only felt empowered to really appreciate the experience that I've had, my exposure to digital transformation thus far. And I really only got to appreciate how complicated it is in real life when I moved to the Piermont Cardiac Center AI team and really got to do the touch points with digital and how we make decisions on the back end. So this is the Piermont Cardiac Center. We are a team of, 10 or 11 people now. But I am the registered nurse on a team of AI scientists, computer scientists, software developers, machine learning engineers. And originally I was hired to focus on translational research of AI into healthcare. This was almost 2 years ago, and it seemed like, okay, I'm transitioning from pharmaceutical trials to AI trials, easy. I did not realize how complicated that was, and my job has actually really ended up looking at all these kinds of things. The kind of legwork that needs to be done to set up infrastructure to be able to research AI in healthcare has ended up being a lot of nothing to do with research in the traditional sense, but more so exploring clinical informatics. How are we set up to measure things and how AI will impact care? Are we ready? Do we have education in place? What are the change management and human factors considerations? Every tool is different. So do we set up an infrastructure or do we do this on a case-by-case basis? So I've really gotten to spend time in my role exploring, trying to tackle these questions and come up with ways that we can properly connect AI throughout processes and people in a sustainable way. So this morning, I'm just going to elaborate on some of the work that I've done in the AI readiness and education space. So with that in mind, given my background and my current role, I always do my best to go out of my way to provide too much information to nurses and other frontline clinicians, allied health professionals, so that they can feel empowered to really participate in bigger picture conversations. And they have the confidence to ask why. I think it's really important to, be able to communicate your critical thinking, but AI is a bit of a daunting topic. Everyone kind of assumes someone else in the room is the expert, and the conversation is kind of hard to start sometimes. So my guiding question is, how can I empower nurses to be leaders in AI adoption, but preserving what makes nurses unique? And I really think what nursing brings to digital transformation in general, specifically AI in my experience though, is that we're the point of convergence in a lot of patient care. We bring a lot of different things together into one place and really act as an advocate. We're subject matter experts across a lot of different things. And nurses are some of the most resilient and adaptable learners and people that I know. So the first area we'll touch on is an AI education for nursing initiative that we did that was really focused on awareness and readiness. So our main goal for this education initiative was just to drive early awareness. So we just wanted to make frontline staff feel like perhaps a little bit more ready. We didn't know when AI was coming, but when it did, I didn't want it to be their first exposure to AI at UHN. So emphasizing that this work started well over a year ago now, I think there's no question that over the last year, the appetite and the literacy levels for AI has grown immensely. But we started this work around March of 2025. So around then, we formed our team, and this kind of formed around the AI Education and Readiness Working Group out of the UHN AI Hub. And with that, it was Chelsea at the time, it's now Afroza was leading it thereafter. The clinical informatics team joined, and then it was me. So I got to kind of join the clinical informatics family. That was my first way in, and I have latched on to them ever since. But we joined this team, and we really wanted to do this properly, so we hosted focus groups from April to May of 2025, really just exploring what's the education landscape of AI at UHN, how do nurses perceive their AI literacy levels, are they ready, are they interested, what questions and concerns would they want addressed, and finally, how would they want that information delivered to them. So we'll go over some of the focus group results. So it was 8 nurses across different areas, really kind of like leadership roles and representation. But the first area we looked at was asking, what's the current AI education landscape? What are you exposed to? And the feedback was really that the only AI experience at the time was through personal use. So this was like ChatGPT, basically. I don't even think we had Copilot at the time yet at work, but it was through media and movies. There's references to The Matrix and that kind of stuff. And maybe just a little bit at the time seeing physicians using scribes or things like that in their practice. The only comment about any kind of formal education was through some of the select nurses that were pursuing master's degrees, and there's some health informatics opportunities that would touch on AI. Then we asked about what do you want to know? How can we kind of address some of the early questions that you'd be interested in learning about? So our feedback was they'd be really interested in use cases. So nurses wanted to learn through application, what are things that they're going to need to know about, and can we use those as kind of leverage in applying our concepts? Basic interest about like concepts, definitions was something that was shared. But specific interest in areas like documentation, communication tools, like translation services, decision support tools, and wayfinding, navigating resources, that kind of thing. When prompted to list some topics specifically, this is a little bit more of like a question that wasn't coming up front at the focus groups, but when we really honed in, nurses did need to know things about privacy and ethics and confidentiality, really the tangible things that link back to liability and professional responsibilities are things that needed to be covered. When we asked about what concerns participants had, again, it was kind of the concern about liability, how to explain AI to patients, how is data being used, how to impact patient relationships, and how it might change the role of nursing itself. And then when asked what nurses might expect patients' feelings to be, we really heard that similar concerns, but the big concept here is that nurses very well might end up being the educators about AI to patients in a lot of scenarios, and that is something that perhaps we weren't ready for. And finally, when we asked nurses how they'd like this information to be delivered, protected time, short bursts, areas focusing on applications, nothing new here, but really we wanted to figure out a way that we could make a pretty dense theoretical-based AI curriculum that. So when we took the focus group results back to our team, we wanted to really reflect on how we could best contribute to preparing Team UHN for the inevitable introduction of AI into practice. Don't know when it would be, don't know how it would be, but the guiding thought was that familiarity would reduce uncertainty. So any early exposure to get the conversation started would make a difference, and at the time we had already accepted that this would be something that would be repeated as new tools emerged. So we move forward with pursuing content-focused, basic AI terms, concepts, positioning AI as an assistant rather than a replacement, trying to come up with real-world examples that might be most likely to be seen in practice soon, and emphasizing that AI will be another one of those things that's just continuously learned No one really knows when it'll end, when it'll plateau, but we'll all be doing that together. On the clinical informatics side, this is where we really honed in on the opportunity to present this information. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but the clinical informatics rounds is already an infrastructure and a system in place where the clinical informatics team go to units and they do 20-minute bursts of information. These are like open to anyone on the units, can just stop and stand there and listen, and it's really conversational in nature. So again, kind of a hard way to do a theory burst of AI, but we gave it a shot. And this is what we came up with. So we actually made a poster, printed it on huge paper, and sent Eric, one of the clinical informatics specialists, out to all the units. So it was a fantastic kind of first exposure. Again, 20 minutes, anyone. It ended up being very multidisciplinary. And the basics were covered here of what is AI, what are key terms that you might hear, like AI, machine learning, different types of way AI can be used. Is it classification? Is it prediction? And really focusing in on use cases that we might see here, but linking it back to stuff that nurses are already doing. We took this opportunity to really hone in on hard work that's going on to standardize clinical documentation and why that matters so much for the success of AI at UHN in the future. So really emphasizing that as frontline nurses, they're already contributing to AI in a huge, really meaningful way that the rest of UHN is relying on. So we, over September to December, we delivered 29 sessions across 308 or so attendees. And as you can see here, we reached a lot of different types of groups. So nurses, OTs, PTs, the list on the screen. But feedback was pretty good. We confirmed that 87% of attendees found that this presentation made them more familiar with AI, which is really all we were going for at the time, just exposure and kind of making them more familiar. So the next time they get this talk or a similar talk, they can ask more questions. Okay. And on the inverse side of this, again, reflecting to prepare for this panel, I really realized how much I've relied on nurses and myself to use my knowledge transfer skills to educate others on nursing workflows. So equally as much as AI education for nurses is important, nurses as educators for AI is probably more important, to be honest. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. So AI in the academic sphere is impressively advanced. We have incredible foundation models that have been built on millions of data sets and different types of modalities. I'm sure we didn't think we would be here a couple of years ago, and that's really exciting, and one day will impact healthcare, but the creation and adoption of AI tools that are ready to be used by frontlines or actually integrated into healthcare workflows is lagging behind a bit. So this is where it is happening, though. It's a work in progress for some homegrown tools at UHN. And the experience has been really exciting in how this multi-directional education is taking place. Nurse leaders across UHN are recognizing the root causes. They're communicating what the problems to actually be solved are, what data is actually impactful and useful and informative for AI development, mapping out workflows so that when we evaluate tools, we're actually measuring the right things, and informing ways that AI success actually can be realized. So I'll elaborate on a few examples, but really honing in here that nurses communicating the problems, the data, the workflows, the education, and the evaluation is something that's going right back into our computer scientists. And it's actually like a really cool, mutually beneficial process where computer scientists are then kind of returning that information, and it's a fun little application-based education exercise on AI in general. So the first one I want to touch on is PMatch. PMatch is perhaps something you've heard of. I get to work on it as kind of like a project manager for the AI side of it, but it just so happens that I have a background from working in the CCRU. And I've been able to act as a subject matter expert. So the AI task of PMatch is extracting data from free text clinical notes and transforming it into discrete data elements as per the MOHCCN schema, which is here on the right. So it's like 156 data elements that didn't exist as labeled things before. So I've gotten to really work with computer scientists and say, this is how a clinical trial nurse would do this. This is how we consider eligibility criteria, and this is what the data elements need to look like as the end product. So I've gotten to be the ground truth, the benchmark, and the evaluator of the AI that's been in development here. The next example is something that's underway. We're developing a case length prediction tool for cardiovascular surgery. Actually, with just the data set, developed a really cool tool that was predictive and successful in estimating how long a surgery might take. But then we took that to the clinical folks and understood their workflow and actually completely scrapped it because it was devastatingly different than what would actually be useful in practice. So cardiac surgical nurses from there have done a beautiful job in teaching our team what it actually means to use these tools in practice. How ready does the data need to be? Is it real time? Is it weekly? Should we be doing rolling predictions on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly basis? What are the consequences of getting it wrong? What are the humans in the loop now? So it's a really informative opportunity and just highlighting how nurses have led that. And the last example here is current work we're doing with the Piermont Cardiac Center outpatient clinics, and we're exploring AI supporting referral transcription and triage. So nursing leadership in this space has been identifying the problems, teaching us the workflows, and once those are clear, we've been successful in securing funding because we can actually prove that there's a problem to be solved here and it would make a difference. This is really exciting work that we're applying co-design frameworks to, and we're actually going to pursue evaluating the impact on AI literacy that participating in co-design through a framework like this between technical and clinical folks has. So to wrap up, my takeaways and kind of talking points that we can explore in the panel. My first is that I wish I'd understood healthcare operations sooner. Being an end user and having that critical lens while I'm being an end user, rather than having that clinical and critical lens after I've left patient-facing care, it's kind of a bummer. And I feel like I have an opportunity that I could have made a bigger difference on systems at the time. The second one is, I don't know what the right amount of knowledge is for nurses on AI. Is it theory-based? Is it more so just tool-based? Is it necessary, or is it more so that I need to apply my critical thinking? You reflect on things like, I have a general concept, but I really have no idea what goes into processing a blood sample and spitting back out a hemoglobin for me to interpret. But I know there's quality checks and there's really smart people on that side of things, so that I can navigate the results, but also kind of know when something might be off. And finally, a nurse's ability to advocate for and represent their clinical area needs will be the enabler of AI innovation, and really building those skills is, I think, the way forward to ensure nursing representation and useful AI tools results. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brianna. That was fantastic. It's great to hear that perspective, especially so clinically focused. I'm going to ask the tech team if it's possible to bring David Wilger up on the big screen. Oh, it's just me. Now it's everybody.
Can you hear me, Mahan?
David, we see you and
Can
your
you
slides.
hear me?
Do you see us?
Yes, can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yes, we can hear you. And maybe we can bring his volume up if it's all right, tech team.
How's that? Is that better?
Oh, that's great. Thank you. All right, take it away, David. Go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mahan. And I apologize I'm not able to be there today in person. I'm David Wilger. In terms of my disclosures, I am a paid employee of UHN and the University of Toronto. It is a great honor to be here today and to be part of the Brian Hodges Research Day. I also have a couple of other disclosures. So I've been told recently in evaluations that I have an undisclosed AI bias. Um, and apparently that's a pro AI bias, according to some observers. I'll leave that to you at the end of the day. I hope that I take a critical lens around we're doing in the world and how we have to respond. My Related to that, I will make the disclosure that AI was not used in the making of this presentation, although some things probably would be different if my friend Copilot did that. And in particular, the images that you'll see were not created by Copilot. And my third disclaimer is apology to everybody in the room, particularly Brian. There is no reference to Foucault in this talk, but there might be some references to other folks. So I apologize for that. Um, okay, just advance my slide. Um, oh, I apologize. I got to stop sharing for 1 second. The wrong presentation came. My apologies. Bear with me. Technical. This will be much better if I actually use the right slide. So apologies. Okay, can you see the slides now? Better?
Yeah, David, you're good to go. We can see you, and
Okay.
the slides are right. Yep, go ahead. All
Okay.
good.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So I do want to say that today I'm presenting from the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation on an island called Bowen Island. So hopefully my connectivity will be good. I wanted to start with this image. This is a painting called Transcendence. It happens to be painted by my wife, who is a painter and an architect. And this painting is intended to represent um, within the forest the deep connections that make a forest live and breathe. And so this is about what you can see, but it is also about all of the connections underneath. And I think this is particularly apt for what we're talking about today. And I'll say she happened to have her first show this past weekend. And what was amazing is not just how uh, this painting represents those connections, but when people came to see this painting, how it connected uh, people so profoundly and deeply to the place, to the connection. And so, in introducing the new technology, I think really what I want to remind us of and talk a little bit today is about the importance of transcending the technology and thinking about the people. Okay. So we are faced with a very interesting landscape now, and Brianna talked a little bit about this already, about the changing and shifting landscape of health and digital education and the landscape in which we're working. And it is not familiar to anyone, which is what's really interesting, is we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. So how do we move forward? So a couple of big thoughts to share. So two people, and Cynthia already alluded to one of them. So Sir Geoffrey Hinton, who is probably well known to all of you in the room, talked about the tremendous hopes of AI, and in particular, its potential for increasing productivity and a better life for everyone, which is grandiose. And Sir Hinton also talks a lot about the challenges and the potential pitfalls of AI. The second one is Pope Leo the 14th, who became Pope last year, and very early on in his papacy, talked about the fact that the field of artificial intelligence poses new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. And this clearly has been a theme that is concerning the Vatican. And so, why should we pay attention to what the Vatican is thinking about in AI? Well, I like to say that the Pope has about 1.4 billion followers. So that's bigger than most Twitter followings, as I can tell. And there's a lot of influence. And this week, as Cynthia alluded to, the Pope dropped his Magnificat Humanitas, his encyclical. And one of the really important themes in this encyclical is around AI. And in particular, talking both about the dangers of AI to human dignity, but also about the challenges that faces us and the important place of educators. And this is what I really want to emphasize to this group, is the importance that the whole world is starting to pay attention to, that education is key to helping us understand how to navigate these new waters that we're faced with. And so, as is stated in the encyclical, in an era when truth is often distorted in order to serve particular interests and communication strategies, the field of education assumes decisive importance. And the encyclical refers to this image of the Tower of Babel as a metaphor of where we're probably at in the world right now, of a lot of people speaking a lot of different languages. And our educators are the ones that maybe can help us guide through a lot of sorting out how to communicate with one another and understand and make sense of where we are. Okay, so quickly, a few propositions for the AI age, and I'm going to start with these, and then we're going to revisit them at the end. And as I show them to you, just reflect on your immediate reaction to each of these. So, AI will change everything in health professions education. AI will change nothing in healthcare, health professions education. Patients know what AI must change, and only AI knows what AI will change. So these are propositions that I hear variations of very frequently, and just reflecting on these, how do we make sense of some of this? So, as many of you know, this notion of digital compassion is important to how I situate and look at the world. And again, thank you to Brian and colleagues for creating the space for this conversation many years ago now. In the Without Compassion, There Is No Healthcare, which has, for me, been a navigator in terms of the work that we're doing in my lab and others. And just a quick reflection around digital compassion, that we use this definition from Bertalan Mesko around digital health, not as a set of technologies, but as a set of technologies that help us think about relationships that are important. And at the center of the definition of digital health, in this case, it's about creating equal level doctor-patient or healthcare and professional and patient relationships with shared decision-making with the goal of democratizing healthcare. And the digital compassion lens here is really about thinking about how compassion layers onto notions of digital health. So several years ago now in the Harvard Business Review, in terms of creating an AI-powered organization, there was this article that gave many different opportunities and many different views on how to create an AI-powered organization. And the one message was educate everyone. And how do we do that? Um, some of you may be familiar with this particular piece of work from Dr. Pratchke. And this work was published in 2024. She gave a keynote at Amy at the AI Symposium last year. And if you don't know this book, Generative AI in Education, it is worth a look. And a couple of things that are pointed out in this particular work is that, and I'll just read this quote because I think it's worth reflecting on. Regardless of the exact shape of or nature of the changes to come, we need to prepare ourselves for a world in which humans and machines will work in symbiosis, where the educator is no longer the single voice of authority, but rather, for better or worse, one of many. And again, this strong theme out of her work comes the first step is AI literacy and thinking about how do we understand the capabilities of the tools and our own capabilities within the use of new technologies and the risks and issues. So it's within this context that we've been doing some work to shift mindset and skill set. And I'll just share some little snippets of this work with you today. And I'll start here with a recognition of the work that many are doing at UHN to think about AI readiness and education. And last year we struck a working group on AI readiness and education. We have 35 people in this committee, and we have been building a foundation based on the vision of an AI-enabled environment where we are enhancing the mindset, skill set, and tool set. And so there are a number of key strategies that we've been building on through this committee and trying to support the organization and work like Brianna's to think about how do we advance our workforce in order to be ready for these conversations. And one of the strategic pillars of this work is foundation AI literacy. And this work really came out of a conversation that I had with Brian, which was around there's a lot of work happening across the organization. How do we start to work towards a more enterprise approach to help everybody from a more equitable lens? And so within this work, we have adopted this model for accelerating AI adoption, and it's really built on the principles of co-design, delivering education, mobilizing knowledge and spread, strengthening our partnerships, making sure that we evaluate the impact and embedding sustained approaches to AI readiness. There's 4 pillars that we really work on. Patient engagement is critical to this work. And then we think about transforming the mindset, skill set, and tool set. So we've been fortunate to receive funding from Future Skills Center over the past 6 years. And I'll just share a little bit of the work that we've been doing. So I'll start with this particular course, which is an AI and mental health course. We're actually running it right now. We've run it 3 times. We're going to run it one more time in July. And this course is really intended to upskill our mental health professionals, both within UHN and across Canada. And it is focused on practical tools. And from an education perspective, we really built it on trying to enhance the reflexive nature of how people are approaching these problems. So this is a snippet from our first evaluation where we had 36 participants enrolled in the course. And we had from a number of different disciplines, as you can see, we had nursing and administrators, psychiatrists and learners, as well as others. And we had 50% of our participants identified as belonging to racialized communities. So we were really trying to think about who our audience was and how we reflect on our position. And one of the things that we had our learners do was write reflective exercises after each of the 4 sessions that we had. And so this is a snippet from one of the themes and from our evaluation. And this really emphasized for us the power of a very basic in some ways, but also critical tool in education, which is the tool of reflection. And so the reflection assignments allowed learners to really create the space to think about not only where they were, but where they were going. And in the words of this particular learner, I like the assignments in that they were focused, but still broad enough that you could sort out, you could reflect on your own practice in your own position, which I think in healthcare we just don't give enough time to do. So just to acknowledge this was a huge team effort as all of these projects. I'll switch to a second project, which is building AI literacy, which we've been doing across UHN. We've built a training and education program, which at its heart includes a number of different education activities, including a number of webinars around what is Copilot and how should we use it. And we've also created a digital learning hub and a number of in-person training sessions. And so this gives you a little bit of an idea of our learning hub. So on the left-hand side is a resource hub that we've created. It's in the last year had over 3,700 unique visitors with 10,000 page views. And we've done 40 Copilot sessions with over 1,200 participants. And we evaluated in a number of different ways, including a number of semi-structured interviews focused on our learner experience and understanding what were the gaps. And so I just want to show you a little bit of that work. So we spoke with 29 healthcare staff who participated in some of these 40 sessions. You can see we had representation from a number of different groups, including some clinical and corporate staff. And what emerged out of our data analysis were 4 learner groups. So our engaged learners, who were self-directed, our enthusiastic novices, motivated but needed structural guidance, our reluctant experts, skilled professionals who need to really understand what the relevance is of what we're trying to do, and the disengaged learners. And you can reflect on what category you might fit in, or maybe you fit into all of these. And so again, just to share a little bit out of this work, we really saw these patterns of learning emerging, and that really, as we introduce these tools, it really needs to be an experiential and practice-based experience. And if it is didactic, we're going to lose people. We really have to do it in the workplace. Adoption depends on the perceived utility, and if they're not seeing the relevance, we're not going to be able to move this forward. And we really have to think about taking a number of different approaches, and I'll talk about that in a second. So in the words of this particular participant, I think it's about demonstrating the utility of Gen AI, because it's not really some specific barrier you're trying to overcome. Staff are not really that resistant. They just don't know what it is or what it can do. And so we already heard about this in the first presentation of trying to create this environment in which we are moving the needle. And so out of that work, what we've tried to do is think about what are our various learner groups, what are our continuing professional needs, and how do we match that to the learning activities that we put into the environment, and start to really tailor some of this education. So if you're an engaged learner, to make sure that we have those advanced scenarios, that we have co-design roles, that we have mentorship opportunities that are available. If you're one of those disengaged learners, how do we make sure that we go back to the foundational orientation, relevance to the role, and make it a low stakes entry point? So really thinking about how we tailor the work here is critical. And again, to acknowledge that a huge team helped us with this work and push this work forward, and thank the funder. Another piece of work which I'll quickly introduce you to is the guiding principles around Care AI. And this work comes out of the EQHS lab led by Jerry Maniat and Lynn Sonnenberg. They have launched a number of tools. One is called Guiding with Care. Another is a toolkit called Healthcare AI. And they have set out a number of principles. There are 9 here. Actually, in the final publication, there will be 10 principles. The last principle around thinking about AI from the perspective of climate health and climate change. I'll draw your attention to a few principles and encourage you to go and look at this document. The principle 2 is really building and maintaining AI literacy, which I think we are starting to pay attention to, but we have a lot more work to do. And then principle 9 is really thinking about how do we build equity into all of the work that we do. And so on that equity lens, and thinking about where we go, I'll just end with this final idea about how are we guided by our patients in the work that we do. And so one of the things that we've been working on as part of this work funded by Future Skills Center is to create a patient charter of rights. And this is intended to be a foundational document that helps us think about how the patient voices are infused into the work that we do, and help us in not only our clinical decisions, but also our education decisions. And so we co-created a patient charter through a multi-stepped, multi-method process, including an environmental scan. We had an advisory that included many patients. In addition, we did a survey across Canada. We had 650 patients participate in that. And out of this process, we have co-created a charter. This is the charter. We launched it at the AMS event in April. You can take a picture of the QR code. I'm also happy to share this. I just want to emphasize a couple of things about this charter, which is what we heard most from our patients, is that trust is key for this work, that trust is a dynamic process, that we must grow consistently, strengthen, that we're going to foster this through transparency, accountability, and access. And that the pillars on which we need to build our AI strategies rooted in trust are health data protection, human oversight, equity and inclusion, and shared knowledge. And this comes out of the work and the guidance from our patients. And so you can take a look at the charter. I shared the link with you. This gives you an example of how we built it out. We built it on the principles. We explained, and hopefully in plain language, and worked hard to do that, around why these issues are important, what they mean, and we've embedded them in patient quotes. And each of the principles is set up this way so that we are constantly reminded where we're coming from. And then we've used this work again to build out a framework to think about how do these principles translate into what we should be doing in CPD. And so, for example, in the area of transparency in practice. How do we disclose AI in plain language? How do we support people to do that? How do we explain the benefits, limitations, and uncertainty? How do we create a space to invite questions in a world in which there is a lot of uncertainty? How do we preserve the human connection? And again, this goes back to the Magnificat Humanitas encyclical. How do we make sure that we're paying attention to our uh, maintaining those issues that help us maintain dignity? And again, a huge group that helped us with this work. So I will end here thinking about alternative propositions for the AI age. So the first, guided by compassion and principles of equity, we can navigate the emerging Tower of Babel and maintain human dignity while harnessing the capabilities of technology. We can build on a strong foundation of AI literacy. We will increase our ability to avoid leaving people behind and making choices that compromise the quality and experience of care we need for a healthier world. And learning to create and sustain trust with our patients, our colleagues, our learners, and our technology partners, where there is no single source of authority, will allow us to transcend to new paradigms of education and care and to realize the potential for a better life for everybody. With that, I will thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity to present at the Brian Hodges Research Day.
Maybe, Brianna, I can invite you back up on stage while we take our Q&A. We are running a little bit behind, so we're going to cut the break short, but have more time for Q&A, please. So everyone can see you, David, and folks on the virtual world, you can raise your hands if you have a question for either of our panelists. And maybe, Brianna, I have one question for you. You talked about how the role of nursing around, especially on data quality and data integrity for making the enterprise of AI functional for UHN. I know that's a really big challenge at the clinical frontline around charting and navigating these new systems. Can you talk to us a little bit about how your work is integrating with the current efforts around making sure data quality, charting, and all that, all those elements are of highest quality possible?
Yes, okay. So I flip-flop basically by hour on my opinion on this. In one sense, I feel like we should just not do anything with AI for data quality and fix it at the source. But there are a lot of cool opportunities that AI could work with what we've got and fix perhaps not the best data quality in some kind of way to make it usable. I really struggle with kind of the downstream risks of that. Coming from clinical research, source documentation is something that I care deeply about, and so do anyone who considers the rigor or auditability of clinical trials. But I get to just sit in, I'm like a non-voting member on the clinical documentation for nursing and PSW communities, and I'm always like amazed by the level of detail and the level of change management that goes into just optimizing processes, because UHN is a bit of a beast, and changing one thing in one area is not going to work for every area. So it's really pragmatic, but the standardization is key. But we look at things like in PMatch, we're working with data that, Epic has a field where you could open or you could enter smoking status and pack years smoked and things like that as discrete values. And then we're in this cyclical state of, okay, is that the most recent area where it's documented, or is it somewhere in the progress note? It's almost like a trust function. So I think like force functions and non-AI solutions is the way to go so that we have confidence in our data. But I don't really have an answer because it's going to take years and years and years that we don't have.
That's reassuring to hear, because I think that's the biggest challenge. And I think in our education context, we have similar problems around data quality at the source. So yeah, I'm very sympathetic to those issues. And Zaid has asked a question. David's already answered it. That's great, fantastic. And folks, we can see the chat screen. So if you are putting questions in the chat and if you're able to answer, that'd be great. I'm happy to read them out as well. Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Brianna. David, fantastic. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to pick on something you said right away because you said you were surprised to be invited. I felt a bit sad about that when I heard what you had to say. You also said that when you thought about what you could invent from a theoretical point of view, it would be devastatingly different from what would be actually useful in practice. And for our community, I want to ask you a question, but I'm also making a point. In UHN, of the 20,000 people, 5,000 of them are nurses. It's one of the biggest groups of students that we have. I oversee 166 endowed chairs, and just recently the second one went to a nurse. Your work is amazing. Obviously, there's no healthcare without nurses. And so Pam is our chief nurse, and we like to say we're joined at the hip, but I think there's no healthcare without a really integrated team-based function. So we've got wonderful, amazing physician leaders, and we've got wonderful, amazing PhD disciplinary scientists, very few nurses. What can we do so that you and your colleagues aren't surprised to be invited to an event like this, but are absolutely integral and core to our education research community?
Okay, well, it's funny because I get, I've done a few events like this, and as a result, very few of them, for how many contacts it's yielded of nurses saying, how could I get involved? Or like, how could I volunteer? And I feel paralyzed sometimes of like, I don't even know how to answer that because I don't want to ask nurses to volunteer after their 12-hour shift to curate ground truths for an AI model. I don't really know how to navigate protected time for something when there's so many competing priorities that I know are more important for patient care delivery. I pursued my master's, kind of designed it so that I was working a 9-to-5 job during it, and I only did that because my manager let me work extra hours to make up for the hours I had to go to school. So there's really cool opportunities there in kind of designing of work, but it's a really intimidating beast of a concept considering the unionized environment and the stuff that needs to get done on a day-to-day. So I wish I had a better answer. I think I did a little time at Sick Kids in my master's for my practicum in the capacity access and flow department, and I was really amazed by the kind of like, I don't know what they call them, but like co-work dynamics where nurses could work on a unit 3 days a week and then they had one protected time for a special project. Or I look at the CAP fellowships, and I've gotten to work with a few nurses who have done those, and just like immediately the passion that you see evolve from the impact that you can make and the measurement of things on your own units. I think programs like that are such a cool opportunity that I would love to insert AI projects into, but it's been a bit of an intimidating thing.
Other questions or comments for David or Brianna? Sorry, that one was answered already. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were asking a question, Rob. Sorry. David, one thing you did say that sort of piqued my interest around the principles was the idea of embedding equity into the adoption and implementation of AI. I think that's something everyone's been challenged by, particularly when the AI tools, especially the enterprise level, are not always in the control of the users. And so what has your experience been in sort of trying to navigate and understand where those equity values come from and maybe aligning them with Canadian values of, if there is such a thing, or with the values of UHN, which are a little bit more clearly defined in the healthcare context?
Mahan, thank you so much for the question. And I think the challenge here, as you say, is the tools that we are using come from a value set that we don't actually know and understand and may be changing regularly. And some of those tools may not be well aligned with the values that we're bringing to the table. And so one of the things that we've tried to do in this work around building an AI charter with our patients is to say, what are some of the things that we need to do? So if we are using tools that maybe have some misalignment, how do we then be open and transparent around where those tools are coming from? How do we think about that trust? And I think the community is really grappling with this issue of trust, and especially trust and consent. So how do we think about who gets to have the power to decide what tools are going to be used? What does that consenting process look like? What's practical to consent? If we're using administrative tools behind the scenes, who gets to have a say in how those tools are used? If it's a patient-facing tool, maybe that's a little clearer. But having those open conversations, I think, is step one to starting to create the space for this equity conversation. I think as it advances, we may or may not have more choice around what's in the tools, but I think we have to be asking these questions. And part of, I think, what everybody is saying is we do not have the literacy currently as a community to be asking these questions in a way that we're comfortable. And so our first responsibility is that the argument I try to make is we have to start with this notion of literacy so that we can understand what the equity barriers are.
Eilette has a question. Thank you, David, for your. Oh, yeah, please do. Yeah, I think David will be able to better hear you.
So, hi, Ayelet Cooper. We don't know each other. David and I know each other. I'm going to ask a question that I've heard asked at many different things around AI, but that seems to be becoming more and more salient as we move more and more towards using AI through our hospitals in our clinical areas. It was a little less pressing when it was a little more theoretical, maybe 3 or 4 years ago at probably at an AMS AI meeting or some other AI related thing. And I don't do my clinical work at UHN, but the hospital I do my clinical work in is also all in on thinking about how we're going to be adopting AI in different parts of our clinical practice. So I'm a physician. I am always extremely aware, as I need to be as a physician, of my responsibility for the decisions that I make for my patients, my moral responsibility and my legal responsibility. The first time that my AI scribe that the hospital is putting into my computer system documents something incorrectly that I miss or that I wasn't paying as much attention because the scribe was documenting, so I don't realize is inaccurate, and something bad happens to the patient as a result of that, or I'm given advice based on a trial where something was interpolated by AI incorrectly, or when the AI tool that the hospital recommends I use for clinical decision making tells me to use antibiotic X and I do, and it was the wrong choice, and I'm being simplistic because that's a decision I think people can understand, because it probably wouldn't be that simple a decision that I would use an AI tool for, but tells me to use the wrong antibiotic and I do, and the patient does poorly, and it's clear that I made the wrong choice. How is the hospital who built those tools, created those tools, paid for those tools, told me to use those tools, going to take ownership of that? Let's say if I am in front of the College of Physicians or in a lawsuit, or how is that going? Once we adopt these things corporately, once they become an official thing that we are meant to use, where does that become the same as my liability if the hospital bed breaks, the patient gets harmed, which is not my liability, even though I'm responsible for the patient's care? So how does that sit in the AI hospital landscape now that we are talking about integrating it directly into what we are supposed to use?
Is Kevin Smith here? I don't know if he's the right person to answer that question. Yeah.
Okay.
situated that in the responsibility for the doctor. Years ago, I was working with nurses, and the comment was made that patients live and die because of what nurses do at the bedside. They have a professional judgment that's imposed, and they actually correct to protect doctors sometimes from their own decisions. How does this change this? I focused on the AI. I would bring it back to nurses' ability for agency to make decisions, to intervene in the face of what AI may be doing.
Maybe Brianna first, and then David, if they can respond.
All right, well, my comments do not reflect UHN decisions that are being made. First of all, I have no idea what UHN feels about this. But I would say it all comes down to the selection of the tools and the workflow design. And really, it should come down to if we got into those situations, what would it be? Is it a completely hands-off, well, you clicked sign and you didn't pen it, you signed that documentation, so it's all on you. I think the example of machines like a blood pressure cuff that's faulty might lead to giving a blood pressure medication unnecessarily. And I think those kinds of things, as a nurse at least, I think that's a completely different dynamic. As a physician, I've always felt relatively comfortable that I would be protected in those situations, because it really comes down to what my intention was, and that I thought I was doing my best. There was I think it was at a Deloitte event, Dr. Mandami from Unity Health just came out and said, patients will, there will be things that go wrong. Patients might get hurt. And it was kind of refreshing to hear that, that's going to happen with AI. That's happened with the rollout of any new medication. That's rolled out with the rollout of any new machine. So I would like to think it won't be different, but it'll really come down to how we design the systems, where are the gating measures, and how much can we reduce the harm. We could go into the whole back end of responsible AI, like monitoring for data shifts and bias and those kinds of things as well. But I would like to think that it won't be that different from anything else.
Thank you, Brianna. David, please, if you have your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I would highlight what Brianna said in terms of we have built a system where we think about error and try to grapple with error. But I'll just reflect on your question a little bit. How many different? There are a lot of assumptions there, and one of the things we have to grapple with is the agency that we're giving to these tools. And I think of making sure that we understand the organizational and individual accountability in using these tools is something that we need to educate people on and think about deeply. And I reflect in my time in working in radiation oncology, and there was at the time a error around the calibration of a radiation machine in a center. And this was a new technology, and a number of folks were harmed. And again, it was this idea of a technology that was, in a sense, the generator of that error. But it's actually how we deal with that and how we approach that. And what I was really interested in is how human the response needs to be. So in navigating this, your moral compass that you talk about, making sure that we keep coming back to that moral compass is going to be so critical in navigating these conversations. But I think we're built to deal with these things. We're built to deal with error, and we're built to address these issues to a certain extent. We're not perfect, but we're introducing a new technology here, and that's been done before. And so we should use the tools that we have and adapt them to the environment in which we're working.
Thank you, David. Brianna said before the day began, in her experience, people expect AI to be perfect and humans not to be perfect, but we're the gold standard. So it's interesting that dissonance exists in our thinking about this. So with that, I'm going to close this part of the event and thank Brianna and David for their comments and talks. They're really great. And yes, more nurses at Hodges Day next year. So we're going to have a 10-minute break till about 10:35, and I'm going to invite Cynthia and Nikki to come on after. So please be prompt, stretch your legs, say hi, get some coffee, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Come back together. Okay. If I get you to take your seats, please. Mariana, give me a hand out. Give me a hand here. Yeah. Thank you. Call them the big guns when people are being unruly. Okay. It's you first. That's okay. Okay. All right, folks. Yep. All right. Grab that last coffee. Take a seat. Okay. Okay, well, thank you everybody for a great morning and some great comments and discussion. So we're going to continue this conversation and shift the basis of our inquiry a little bit back into education. And we're going to start with Dr. Nikki Woods, who's going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, certainly mine, integration. Yes. All right. So please welcome Nikki to the stage.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mahan, for, oh, the slides are already up and everything. I like this place. This is great. So yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to come and chat with everybody. This morning there we go. I was reflecting that, I haven't been invited to actually speak at Hodges Day in a very long time. I usually get to do the introductions, or can you come and ask people questions, but no one ever asked me to come and say things. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for all of you. And so today you guys are in for a treat. Okay? Years ago, Rachel Ellaway was one of our Hodges Day speakers, and she described the event as clever people saying clever things to each other. Cleverly. That's me, okay? That's what we're gonna get today. I aspire to Rachel Ellaway clever today. I'll start with my disclosures. So my first one, and unfortunately I do apologize, I did not do a disclosure slide. I was not instructed to, so this is your fault. Oh good, then forget it. I can do off-label, yeah, all sorts of things. My one disclosure is I am on the Academic Advisory Board for ScholarRx, which is an education technology company. I will not be shilling for any of their products today. What I will be talking about is much of my own research and that of my colleagues. I'll also give my other disclosure. So Brianna was saying what generation you are, okay? So I'm Gen X. I looked this up, okay? Looked this up while you were talking. I was like, what do they say about Gen X and AI? And it turns out, we love these things, apparently, right? We love smart tools and watches and stuff, and we also have brand loyalty. That is me, in a nutshell. I love smart gadgety things, and I like AI tools and just new stuff. So I think that kind of fits with me. We're also latchkey kids. That was also me. That's not relevant, but I did want to add it, okay? My disclosure, the other things people should probably know before I start talking is that I am an experimental cognitive psychologist. That is a reminder for some, brand new information for others, but definitely an important reminder that's going to frame what we're going to talk about. I'm reminding you because it's contrary to the rumors that are being spread about me, that I am a qualitative researcher. This is being spread loudly and actively by Stella. You know what? Words can hurt sometimes, Stella. Okay? And today I say respectfully, I am not. Okay? I am an experimental cognitive psychologist. And if you invite an experimental cognitive psychologist to say something about AI, my disclosure is you will get no mention of any AI tools or anything like that. What we're going to talk about today is my kind of lens on this, which is around clinical reasoning, forgetting, remembering, and learning, because that's kind of what I care about. So that's my disclosure. Here we go. Health professions education, and this is true across disciplines, this is true across boundaries of global countries and sectors. Health professions has a history of long-standing, forever and ever, being informed, even informally, by theories of expertise and expert development. At the end of the day, what most people do when they're trying to build a program, build a new medical school, build a new dentistry program, is they try to think to themselves, what is it that makes an expert in that area? What makes a physician an exceptional physician? And if I can figure that out, if I can figure out how an expert does the cool things that they do, I can work backwards and build an education system that informs that development. So even if people don't explicitly articulate their inner cognitive psychologist, that's how we essentially build education programs. We think about what it means to think like an expert. And of course, there's various models of education and various models of expert development. You can think of like Dreyfus and Dreyfus, you can think of Erickson's deliberate practice. These are all different ways of thinking about what's the path to becoming an expert clinician. When we think about clinical reasoning, the models of expert development essentially foreground knowledge. So what cognitive psychologists try to understand is what is the essential knowledge that helps a physician, a dentist, a nurse become exceptional. And what we're essentially trying to look at is what's the knowledge that they have and how do they apply that knowledge to reproduce superior performance again and again and again. So knowledge always matters. It matters in every age. So we're talking about the digital age, but the truth is, from a cognitive psychology perspective, knowledge is essential to expertise, no matter what the age would be. In this age, what we have to understand is what's different about knowledge when you're talking about AI, and when you're talking about digital tools. The first thing that's different, probably the only thing that's different to be honest, is that knowledge and information is abundant. It's at a level that wouldn't have been true if we weren't talking about the digital age. The amount of information available to everybody at any moment, in any second, is unbelievable. And it's increasing faster and faster every single day. And what's interesting about that is with the help of these kind of tools that are available to us, it almost seems like novices transform into instant experts. So someone who has never done computer programming can suddenly build their own programs because they have an AI tool in front of them. I heard a rumor that somebody who's a Foucault devotee recently learned to produce his very own Sankey charts and graphs on his own in his office with the sole purpose of presenting them on a screen to other humans. This is with all becoming available because of an AI tool. You can use AI tools when you can't write and suddenly you sound like Shakespeare. Okay? You can sound like an expert. If you're really good, you can turn your ChatGPT into your own personal sommelier, and you can pick the best wines in this city at the best restaurants. Ask me how. Okay? All of these things are doable. From a clinical reasoning perspective, it seems kind of dangerous for a minute, though. Because with the right AI tool, a novice can synthesize evidence, understand signs and symptoms, come up with a list of differentials, and seem like an expert clinical reasoner. Now we're nervous. It's kind of cool when we're just picking wines. So understandably, you can get some anxiety. What happens to clinical reasoning when information's abundant? I think that's the interesting question. It's actually not about the specific tools, but what happens to knowledge and expertise when information is everywhere? Oddly enough, for someone who's interested in knowledge and knowledge acquisition and clinical reasoning, I actually am not that fussed about what happens when knowledge is everywhere. And it's because I can accept that information can be abundant because abundance isn't actually expertise. Expertise is completely different. One of the kind of lay assumptions is that because AI makes knowledge accessible, rapidly accessible, it must mean that the expert's not really necessary. The thing is, even though experts have a lot of knowledge, what cognitive psychology has always taught us is that it's not just having the knowledge that matters. It's the form in which that knowledge exists within the mind of the expert. Knowledge is not shapeless. Knowledge is not just isolated facts. Knowledge is organized carefully in a very specific way. And it's that mental cognitive architecture that distinguishes the expert from the novice. So in reality, experts don't just have lots of knowledge. They don't just know more. They actually know differently. If you look at all of the research in clinical reasoning, I'll cite for a moment Jeff Norman, because he might be on. Isn't Jeff on? Not. He's not on one. Is he on? Do you know? Yeah, he is. Even if he's not, doesn't matter. We'll cite him anyway, right? So if you look at Jeff Norman's early work on dual processing models, you might think, okay, well, it's just pattern recognition. Clinical reasoning is just pattern recognition. That is the worst simplification of someone's life work. It's not that clinical reasoning is just pattern recognition. What all of Jeff's work shows us is this intricate basis, this really careful dual processing system, system one, system two, how these two forms of knowledge work together to rapidly and efficiently produce a diagnosis. That's so much more than just pattern recognition. Hank Schmidt has a beautiful body of work looking at how basic science and clinical knowledge can form these really intricate mental structures of clinical signs and symptoms that become immersed underneath basic science mechanisms into a beautiful cognitive architecture that exists only in the mind of experts. And it's phenomenal. George Bordage's work on illness script, which I don't actually use in my own work, but I will say it's a beautiful way of thinking again about how you can take unorganized knowledge and turn it into scripts and schemas that an expert then uses to arrive at a diagnosis. Again, knowledge that a novice wouldn't have. So at the end of the day, what all of that work tells us is the issue is never having random, isolated pieces of knowledge. The value of expertise is actually in the connections. It's in the way that the knowledge is organized. Greg Murphy and Doug Medine would argue that the important piece is not the isolated facts in the mind, it's the interstitial space in between those two facts that makes the expert the expert. I would argue then that you could have access to all the information in the world and all the tools you wanted, and you'd be missing the most important part. It's the connections. So what we need to think about in this day and age, in the digital age, it's what's our definition of expertise. I happen to have a really good one. So the definition of expertise that we could be and should be, in fact, I might even argue it's the only definition, since I have the mic, the only definition of expertise that we should be concerned about is this one. So expertise is not having access to information. It's procedural fluency, complemented by explicit conceptual understanding that permits new learning and invention in situations of novelty, ambiguity, and uncertainty. That's what an expert clinical reasoning looks like. It looks like having the availability of information, being able to understand the procedural fluency, go fast, be efficient, but have that complemented by a rich conceptual understanding of not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. That's the knowledge, that integrated knowledge is what you need when moments are uncertain, ambiguous, and complex. And that's actually healthcare. That's more of the moments, frankly, in healthcare. And so in this kind of digital age, I would say this interstitial space matters more than any time before. So here's the thing I can't skip this and not mention this. One of the biggest challenges for thinking about clinical expertise and clinical reasoning in this current time is the concern that these cognitive mechanisms will be something that physicians will stop being able to use because of their reliance on these digital tools and AI tools specifically. And the idea here is that if our system increasingly allows people to use these tools to do the heavy lifting of the cognitive work, what will happen to human expertise? Human clinical reasoning. We've already seen in the literature several studies. There's a systematic review that just came out last month that looked across the literature at different clinical reasoning studies. And what they found was that if you have groups of physicians who are encouraged to use AI tools to make clinical decisions, so they've been doing this for several months in their clinics, then you give them a chance to, you take away the tools and you say, now, perform some of these same clinical reasoning tasks. And what you see is their accuracy goes down. They do seem to have offloaded that skill. That's the way they describe it in the literature. From a cognitive psychology perspective, what's really happened, it's a use it or lose it kind of thing. I talked about those pathways and those connections in this complicated architecture. The truth is, if you don't use it, it goes away. You do in fact lose it. It's just what happens. If you don't practice it, it'll be gone. So now everyone's really panicked. What I'd add to that is I really am not. It's just not that big of a deal. Why is it not that big of a deal? It's not that big of a deal because this has always happened. This is true. Our brains actually have done this forever. It is often the case that your brain has to offload. It has to actually routinize. It has to make some things faster. And you do have to actually have some things decay. That's how humans are built. So even though right now it's happening in a time when we can see it and we're looking at it and it's panic inducing, the truth is it's happened before many, many a time. I've used Kahneman here as my example of a whole body of literature that covers this idea of heuristics and biases and cognitive ease. This is a system that has existed for decision-making outside of medicine forever. Now, is it a perfect system? No. But it works most of the time. Similarly, we have a lot of literature in cognitive psychology that looks at skill decay. It happens all the time. I recently noticed that my children have quite possibly the worst penmanship I've ever seen in my life. It is shocking what my 17-year-old will produce. And it's because he doesn't actually write that much. He types all the time. So his penmanship is atrocious. My 14-year-old cannot read cursive. Can't read it. He's like, what is that? I'm like, it's a letter E, like the lower E. He's like, how? It doesn't look like an E, right? That skill is going away completely. It is what it is. Most of the time they're going to be typing, it's different. We also have an extensive body of literature in cognitive psychology that actually already looks at what happens when you offload to other things in the space. So I have Hutchins' model of distributed cognition. It's not new that cognition has to be shared outside of humans, across space, across time. That's just true. That's human cognition. So I understand de-skilling is petrifying, but it's actually, I don't think, the biggest issue. Here's the petrifying. If you're doing AI talk, you have to do like this alarming part. So here's my alarming sky is falling. The bigger issue, even if you take my definition of adaptive expertise as the definition it is, it's the most important one, if we decide that that's where our focus is going to be, forget the de-skilling. What you have to worry about is never skilling. And so for an audience of educators, I would argue this is where we should be spending every other conversation around AI should be focused on this. And it's the fear and the concern that students learning in these digitally rich AI-based environments will actually never build the cognitive structures that they need. Never building a structure is completely different than having a structure maybe decay or be out of practice. It is far, far worse to never have the opportunity to understand deeply the thing that you're supposed to become an expert in. That's a problem. A large body of literature looks at the role and value and importance of students developing really nice, intricate, complicated structures that are designed not just to support their performance today, but to support their learning down the line. The extent to which AI tools prevent students from actively developing early knowledge structures, that is our real challenge, because you will not be able to recover that down the line. So as much as students like to use AI tools now, the real concern is that in doing so, they'll never develop the procedural fluency. They'll never develop the conceptual understanding, and they'll never be able to make decisions when they're faced with uncertainty and novelty and complexity. So that's really the risk, is having a system where learners are able to bypass the tough parts. In Kapoor's work, he focuses on productive struggle. Naomi Steenhoff has done a beautiful set of studies I encourage everyone to look at on this exact topic. And what he's teaching us is not that struggle is important. So this is not, it's important to do hard things because I did hard things and hard things are good for you. It's not that. It's that in the struggle, you are able to develop what you need in that interstitial space. It gives you the opportunity to learn the rich conceptual knowledge. AI tools have a tendency to strip the struggle away. And it feels great in the moment, and you get the answer in the short term. But you risk never developing the meaningful connections, the integrated understanding that you would need for future practice, for future learning. In our own work in the lab, what we have seen time and time again is that students who are brought into the lab and not given the opportunity to develop conceptual understanding. So we'll have two groups of students. One group learns both basic science and clinical, one learns only clinical. The group without the basic science, they look good on the first day, they look horrible when they come back the next week. Right? That development of that imperative cognitive architecture is destroyed. And that means that they won't have the fundamental architecture they need for future learning. This is all of Bransford's work, and Schwartz's work looks at the idea of having what you need for transfer. The big thing to keep in mind with Kapoor, with the cognitive integration, with the Bransford and Schwartz, is that integration is an effortful cognitive activity. It's hard, it takes work, it's not fun. And if you strip it all away, it becomes meaningless. You have a set of isolated facts all sorted together without any sort of interstitial space. So I would argue that in a digital era, we only need to worry about two things. I'm gonna make it nice and simple in my avoidance of never skilling. The only two things any of us ever need to talk about again are integration and adaptive expertise. Because if you just focus on those two things, you will have all the knowledge. It's Hodges Day. I'm allowed to say whatever I want. You gave me the mic. Okay? If you have those two things, you will have this focus on the types of knowledge that are really needed in this type of space. So what would it look like if we built our education and our research around this? The first is that we would think about productive struggle with AI. So I'm not suggesting skip the AI altogether. There's no point in making that argument. What I am suggesting is that AI tools can actually be designed to help students struggle, to force them to struggle. Agentic AI is supposed to make you feel good. It could also push you if it was designed appropriately. It's a Naomi and Anne Kaumura, who I think is online, actually recently were funded by SSHRC, no doubt, to actually study what it would look like to design and utilize AI to support productive struggle. Right? If you do this well, you can design challenges that actually require effort and require sense-making to build that durable conceptual knowledge. So there's no need to abandon the tool. Simply think about how the tool could be used to support the learning mechanisms that we know are important. The other thing you can think about is what would it mean to use integrated instruction in this type of space? And so Christy has been doing work for her PhD, thinking about how you can use online educational platforms that also use AI tools to present students with integrated instruction that puts together those two really key forms of knowledge, procedural and conceptual, in ways that still feel good, still fit kind of what this new generation wants to learn, but doesn't take away what we know to be solid education practice. And so you can support the integration of concepts and cases and underlying mechanisms so that students build those essential connections that they need for underlying knowledge. The other thing you can do, using all resources, digital or not, is focus on helping students deepen their conceptual understanding at every opportunity. So it's recognizing the value and rewarding in-depth conceptual knowledge of all types. So this is your knowledge of basic science, your knowledge of social science, your knowledge of system science. Those are the things you want to reward, as opposed to rote memorization of facts. Because the truth is, AI will be able to do a lot of those rote memorization skills. It'll be faster, it'll be efficient, that's great, leave it to them. The key is to reward students for learning that deeper connected knowledge, because that's what they're going to need in whatever the next era is that's on its way. So I'll leave with one final parting shot, if you will, that at the core of anybody doing education or research or even clinical work in a digital age is to focus on knowledge. It was the thing that was always going to carry us through anyway. And so I know it can be tempting in these moments to want to jump and say, forget just knowing stuff, I'll be nice about it. Forget just knowing stuff, not that's kind of a dick. Yes, it's important to be compassionate and care, but you also still have to know things. It still matters a lot. And you can still design education and clinical experiences to focus on this type of expert reasoning. I will stop there and say only the integration matters more than ever. Thank you. I don't know how to stop this. I'm gonna leave it. All right. So,
well, it's great to go at the end of all these wonderful talks, and I'm going to, when I asked Mahan, so what do you want me to talk about? He said, oh, you know, the things you usually talk about, the carousel, history, and Ursula Franklin. So here I go. So I think other speakers have alluded to this, but really, how do we harness the power of technology wisely is really where we need to, is a good starting point for how we think about AI and other technologies. There's no question that AI is powerful. We need to think about how we best use technology in education. And as the Wilson Center, we are an ideal place to think about these things. Yes, there's cognitive integration and adaptive expertise and a bunch of other things too that I would argue are also important, that those are two of a host of things that matter in our community. And Nikki and I can fight about it afterwards if you like. So I would like you to put up your hands if you think this statement is a reasonable statement, that AI is so complex and powerful that it has greater potential than any previous technology to transform, disrupt, or change healthcare and healthcare education activities. Does anyone think this is a reasonable statement? One person, two people, 3, 4, 5, 6, a very small minority. How about this one? AI is just the latest technology, and like many technologies before, it is being constructed as the solution to all of our problems. And these are not mutually exclusive questions. All right, getting maybe a third, we're approaching a half of the room. Interesting. So this suggests the Wilson Center is a place that thinks critically, and that we do not just accept things, but there's no question that AI is a powerful thing. Okay, we're going on to a test. Mahan invited me, how could I not give a test? He also set up a perfect, I am not an assessment person. He's an assessment guy. I use assessment because I have to. It has uses. And Mahan set up the perfect scenario. 2 weeks ago at the DFCM conference, I gave a talk with Lucy, and we asked a question, and I'd say the audience, well, you're a direct comparison. So so we'll see how the Wilson Center does in comparison to the participants at DFCM. So I want you to read this quote. Now, raise your hand if you think that it is possible that this quote is describing AI. Is it possible? Possible is okay, so maybe half the room? All righty. And, sorry, raise your hand if you think it is impossible that this quote is describing AI. Absolutely impossible that this could possibly be describing AI. No. So over half of the room thinks it is neither possible nor impossible that this is describing AI. Well, at DFCM it was under 25% who thought it was either possible or impossible. So we can have a conversation about what it's like for the quote to be neither possible nor impossible during the discussion. In fact, this comes from 1989 by a family doctor who talked about bringing computers into the office. And so I would suggest that we have had used this kind of language before in talking about AI, about technologies, and we're now using similar language to talk about AI. You know, that AI is fundamentally different. We can do all these things. Oh, we have all these problems. AI will be the solution. We hear that rhetoric a lot. So AI is our current solution. It's a solution that it's interesting, it's being positioned as, it's moving so fast, we better gallop, if not get in a fancy sports car to chase behind it, if we're going to have any chance of keeping up with it. And that's just keeping up, let alone managing or thinking about it or having any influence about how it is used. So, coming to the carousel, one of my requirements for the talk, according to Mahan, is it just the latest technology that we're going around on the curricular carousel? I'm making an assumption that at least a few of you in the room have heard about this. Brian's a co-author on the paper. He better not have forgotten about it. And it's where I looked at 100 years of the history of medical education, and we kept coming back to the same problems. These are new problems. They've never been solved. Here's our solution. Let's head off. And we would dash off in using that new solution solver, only to find ourselves 10, 20 years later saying, oh, golly gee, here are all our problems. Never had them before. We've never had too much information. We've never had over-specialization. We better do something about it now. And heading off again. Now, and we just don't recognize that many of these are recurring problems. You know, what we're facing is often not entirely new. And there's nothing wrong with that, and we'd do better just to recognize it. So this carousel is an AI image thanks to Lucy. And we've used it in a couple of talks. As I looked at this, and as I thought about this, I think I need to nuance and maybe update the metaphor a little bit. Because circling on a carousel could be dizzying, but there is a sense of a carousel being, if you go to an amusement park, it's the thing that little kids get on. It's not really that exciting. There's no urgency to change. And so I think that while the carousel brings back the idea that we haven't solved our problems and we're heading off again, for one thing, Mahan, thankfully, using AI, gave me a more updated version of the carousel. There's the historical element and the modern element. And still, a carousel is a relaxing thing to do. Not too many people get scared on carousels. So then I returned to the author of the initial quote, Bill Hogg, and he gave me some helpful language. this is a stampede towards computerization. We really don't know where we're going. And so if we're leaving the carousel stampede style, are we even headed in a clear direction? So I had to then step in and use Mahan's AI horses. And so what kind of a stampede are we really on here? And do we wish to stampede off? Stampedes don't usually, they're not easy to corral, to set a course. Are we on a course with something like AI? And if we're not, does that matter? I'd rather we be deliberate, but that's a question for our community. I'm now going to move from the carousel to what does Ursula Franklin tell us about it? And she is a brilliant theorist. I've actually switched from Foucault to Franklin. I have a different favorite theorist, beginning with F now. And she's really important theoretically for us, I think, because she's interested in education, technology, and thinking about the kind of research questions we should ask. How Wilson Center is that? So she was, for people who don't know her, university professor at University of Toronto, so home, here in Toronto in engineering, a metallurgist who developed the field of archaeometry, the study of ancient technologies. And she used a lot of chemistry and physics to do her research. So we're going to use her to go from what Ursula Franklin has said to what Ursula Franklin would say. She's no longer alive. She was not around for AI. Ursula Franklin takes us back to basics. She gives us very basic definitions, takes us back to starting points, which I think is an important place for us. She's also, just to give a bit of background and context, a Quaker, a pacifist, grew up in Nazi Germany, and all of those things influenced the way she thought. So this is one of the things Ursula Franklin really emphasized. We haven't changed that much from people 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We're still people. Our humanness really isn't all that different. We need, and what has changed is how our societies deal with some of these things. Health and knowledge, health and illness, transmitting knowledge, those are things we think about here, but shelter, food, livelihoods, and she's concerned about how when technology can disconnect knowledge from the knower and what happens when knowledge is disconnected. So this links back to Nikki's knowledge really matters. Ursula Franklin, from a completely different theoretical perspective, also emphasized how knowledge is critical. And she gave a definition of technology. It's the way we do things, a practice. It includes not only the machines and devices, but also everything that surrounds that. The systems of control, the management systems, social organization, divisions of labor, and social acceptance. And we cannot think about a technology, Franklin argues, without thinking about all of those things that surround technology. She says in many of her writings that no technology is inevitable. It's not, we didn't get here on a linear path. And they're not necessarily good or bad. I think Nikki made that point as well. It's how we interact with them. And David Wilger and Brianna, we have choices about how we use technology. Recognizing the power and recognizing that they reshape our structures, and often profoundly. So thinking about that, how do we think about using technologies in health professions education and the things we should study about them? Franklin also gives a definition of education, an enterprise that attempts to increase both knowledge and understanding. So I agree, knowledge is essential, understanding is necessary too. And this is a quote of hers I particularly like. We all know people who know it all and understand absolutely nothing. We also know people who have a profound understanding of their problems, as well as of the human and social situation around them, yet lack the knowledge or the access to knowledge to do anything about the situation. And so how do we bring knowledge and understanding together. And that was a real preoccupation of Franklin's. How do we think about both? She also talked about how education is not the mere transfer of information. In any of our education, the education we do, we teach many more things than we explicitly think about. You know, we think about the hidden curriculum in our work in HPE, but there's all these other things that happen in classrooms, in learning settings, in workplace learning settings. Tolerance, discipline, context, and if we don't think about those as well, then what happens as technologies come in? We may lose things. And if we're not even aware that we may be losing them, de-skilling is one thing we can look at and people might think about more. But what other things do we potentially lose, and do they matter? We can lose things and it may not matter. But there are things that really could matter, and it's up to us to think about that. Franklin also talks about the importance of the subversive element in education. Having students think critically, use historical perspectives, and reason soundly. Very Wilson Center. And that learning also is relational, social, and the human aspect of it. If education is not something people choose to engage in healthcare, we're in trouble. We all have to keep learning. And so how do we make sure we incorporate those elements into education design? Franklin is clear that educators, we have that responsibility. And as the Wilson Center, we have the responsibility to ask the research questions to guide students to use technology critically, thoughtfully, and ethically, and think about the benefits and limitations of any technology we use. So, similar to David's talk about AI literacy, Franklin talks about the need for technological literacy with any technology, including the social assumptions that are embedded and the impacts on equity in the environment, that all of those are implicit assumptions built into technological literacy. She also, for example, a technology, you could say that the Bible was a technology used by missionaries to teach students English. The Bible used by missionaries as a technology had a few other effects. If we think about Canada and the erasure of Indigenous knowledge, if we think about colonized countries around the world, so that's, considering that a technology and the effects, we need to think about those things. And so Franklin says every tool shapes the task. And she says we have to ask three important questions. What does it do? What does it prevent us from doing? And what do we not do anymore because of it? If we don't do it anymore, it may matter, it may not matter, but we should think about it. It should be in our minds. Franklin talks a lot about research, because she was a very serious researcher. She studied all sorts of interesting things that we can talk about another time if we want. And she talks about research again. She goes back to basic definitions. It's an organized attempt to access, gain, and evaluate knowledge. Again, this is so Wilson Center. We could rename ourselves the Franklin Center, as far as I'm concerned. And the most important part of research is the question, and she exhorts us to ask different questions. We really need to think about shunning the extension of the obvious and making sure that we're not just following a popular trendy line. She also makes sure that we think about the social enterprise, that it is a social and human activity as much as it is a professional and scientific activity. She uses the example of Margaret Ann Armour, who's a chemist who was in Alberta in the 1980s, when chemo was a great, there were huge chemo advances in the 1980s. And Alberta made the decision that chemo should go to communities. Get it out there into the rural and remote communities. And Margaret Ann Armour said, well, that's great, but if you're taking chemo into small communities and they're being given in nursing stations, what happens to the little bits that are left over? Those are some pretty toxic substances. Don't want to dump it in the closest river. And there had been no thought about how to safely manage the products that were left over and, make them non-toxic. And so she spent a huge amount of time studying ways that were practical, using things like bleach and other things that were understood by the nurses in those nursing stations to break down the chemicals into things that were safer. This was not trendy research. She did not get research CIHR funding. She was ignored. It was passed over for tenure. It took a very long time for her research to be recognized. Eventually, but she had huge effect on having safe chemo disposal practices in these communities. And so how do we think about what matters in research? She eventually became very well known. There's a school named after her, just like there's one named after Ursula Franklin. She was once told by a student when she visited the school, "You're so lucky to be named after a school." So you're so lucky, Brian, to be named after Hodges Day. So really for Franklin, it boiled down to, we must do science as if people matter. We don't, technology is not worth thinking about if it's not in relation to people. So I'm put these in assuming that a lot of people would allude to them already, and so I can run through them a bit more quickly. But in terms of the kind of questions, yes, we can think about what AI is doing to make things faster, more efficient, but how does it also affect the well-being of people and the health of societies and the planet? In our own health professions education research, we can talk about what it's doing to make it easier and more efficient to get education, but what does it do in terms of student curiosity, the deep learning that Nikki talked about, as well as well-being and caring in these settings? And I will leave this because Nikki's already given us the answer. So Franklin talks about, we too often say people are the problem and machines are the answer, technologies are the answer. And that, in and of that framing, is deeply problematic. If in healthcare, we think that the people are the problems and the machines are our answers, what on earth are we doing for people and their health? I mean, if we don't start, healthcare presumably at this point is about people. I hope that doesn't change. I have to be honest, I don't really care about the health of machines. That may be heretical of me. Maybe I should care deeply about the health of machines, but I care much more about the health of people as a family doctor. And so how do we think about the relationships between people and machines? And what problems are we trying to solve as we chase after these technologies or rein them in or whatever it is we are doing with them? And are we using the technologies as we ask our research questions, as we develop education, in ways that may actually help solve these problems? Let's define the problems first and make sure that we're taking an approach that will solve them. If not, should we expect to take another turn on the carousel? So to paraphrase Franklin on science, we must do healthcare and education as if people matter. So if we're thinking of getting off this carousel, we're not going to harken back to the golden age. Do we want to stampede madly off in some unknown direction and just see where the horses take us? Or, following Franklin, can we think about all of these things, think about healthcare and education as if people matter? Following Franklin, I would suggest, is a way the Wilson Center can really help us with these incredibly difficult questions for our time. Thank you. Nikki, I think you're supposed to come.
Yes. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. Thoughts, comments, reflections? Tina, please go ahead.
I love this dueling panel. So one thing that's actually common in both of your talks is this appreciation that because we are human and biologically we function in a particular way, our relationship to technologies mechanistically might remain the same, and our anxiety around what happens when we change our tools, the tools that we have at hand, might also be the same. But I'm wondering, but as a sociologist, you might be thinking a little bit differently, which I am, kinda, right now. And I would be adding to this appreciation that even though mechanistically we might be seeing the same phenomenon occur over time, even though the urgency might be very similar as this phenomenon appears over time in different eras, the way it's appreciated and experienced by humans is dramatically different. And I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit. I know you're not a historian, Nikki, but you have been following these issues over time as well. And we might think about what relationship that might have to the things that we need to be doing on the ground as we're preparing learners to address this new materiality.
No, I think that's fair, Tina. And I don't know that it's, obviously we can't predict, right? So I don't think I would say that I can say for certain. So like, we'll use the de-skilling example. So yes, it's true that we have had moments in human history where our brains no longer do a task they used to do. And as Cynthia said, sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's not. And so the only thing I can offer is I think we should be prepared that there will be some things we don't do. And so what we'd have to do proactively is try to guess what are those things we feel comfortable not doing for a bit. And we have to push ourselves to think more broadly. Maybe it's something we really like doing right now. So I understand when you read the de-skilling studies right now, and you read it and you're like, oh my goodness, now they made all these errors and they're not diagnosing as accurately as they used to. And you might want to now devote all these resources to maintaining the ability to diagnose exactly the way we would before. I would argue what you have to think about is what's a new model of diagnosis and clinical reasoning that doesn't look like the previous one that would allow for some de-skilling. So what does that look like when you work with the tool? And so I do think that's a distributed cognition model. And we don't use distributed cognition as much. So I would say most of the decision-making tools that AI builds right now, they're not built on distributed cognition. They're built on individual human cognition within one person. So I think that's the way I would play with it. I think you would have to have the humility to know we don't know which direction this is going to go, but also not be so fearful. The thought is we have to preserve exactly whatever way it is we're doing it now.
And adding to that, historians definitely do not predict the future. At the same time, what we learn from history can help us understand our current anxieties and concerns, and they're generally not brand new. Even if they're, I mean, every context is different. Every context, people will have a different experience. Of course, the context changes it. What people were experiencing in 1903 with concern about hot air balloons up over the Alps is not the same thing we're experiencing with AI. So, and yet there is continuity of certain things while the context has changed. So how can we bring those understandings to help us think about what we might learn from the past to move forward?
I'll go to Brian and then Naomi.
Yeah, God, that was amazing. You know, I think the Wilson Center is incredible. I don't want to be romantic and whatever, but that was amazing. The talks today were all fantastic, but this is such a fantastic example of two different, very, very different points of view enriching the whole. I have a question I think you can both answer. So much focus is on, as you say, Nikki, the de-skilling, and Cynthia too. It's so much on the negative side. It's what we're losing, what we're taking away. I think there's an opportunity bubbling in both your talks, and I want to ask you, I'm going to give you what I think are two halves of the same coin, but you're going to tell me if it is. Surely we should be focusing on how we advance human ability with AI in the Franklin model. Nikki, for you, it's going to be metacognition, and Cynthia, it's going to be critical reflection. These are, I think, similar things from different points of view, but could you say something about how can we get past, and I am an assessment person, God, can we just stop memorizing? We're spending so much time forcing people in assessment models that are so outdated. But how are we going to teach, and maybe more importantly for me, assess and put value on things like higher cognitive function. For you, the cognition, the metacognition, thinking about thinking, and Cynthia, maybe how do we unknot this thing that Stella's written about, that as soon as you start assessing reflection, it turns into some performative thing. But clearly your talk is all about critical reflection and the ability to think. I would argue none of our assessment methods anywhere in any of our health professions are doing any of this right now.
Yeah, so I think we've always seen in the work we've been doing in the lab for literally 20 years, we always have these multiple assessment moments at the end of any study. And then when we talk about the studies, we only talk about one of the assessments. But the whole point, the reason we have multiple is we are very acutely aware in those experiments that different assessments pick up on different things. The challenge when we move out of the lab into education world is we forget that and we keep assessing the worst thing. So I would argue in most of our education programs, we take the equivalent of the data that I throw away in the lab and we make someone a doctor because of it. It's ridiculous. So we reward the rote memorization every single time. And in our research studies, we don't care at all about that data because we know it's our manipulation check at best. And MedEd has a tendency to build entire elaborate systems around that one piece. So I think the goal is to think about assessment systems that actually reward conceptual knowledge and conceptual understanding. So the first step is broadening your definition of conceptual understanding. So a lot of people are looking at this right now. It's broadening your definition of basic science, thinking that basic science doesn't just mean biomedicine, it means social science, system science, other things, right? Nicole's online. Nicole Bashkar is doing work looking at the different definitions of conceptual knowledge. So that's your first step, so that you can value what it really means to understand something richly. And then you have to reimagine what it means to assess that. So it might mean that you don't always just reward the right answer. You can imagine assessment systems that actually allow for multiple answers. You could imagine assessment systems that allow people to use all the tools around them and show your capacity to learn something new that you've never learned before in the moment of the assessment. So it's not you come to the assessment and show me what you know, it's you come to the assessment and show me what you can learn. Those are two different things. And so I think it's that kind of radical shift in what it means to assess and what it means to truly understand. Those two things is where I would put my energy right now if I had the power to do so.
And in terms of your question, Brian, Stella's the critical reflection person, so I'm not going to speak on that. I think that what Ursula Franklin brings us and what I think is really important to think about is what happens to the structures? What happens to, so if we think about the structures around medical education, health professions education, as we bring these technologies in, what happens within those structures? What has changed? And what do we understand about the nature of the important things that go beyond those that are easy to assess? It's not just the individual assessing, but what is happening within this education environment that is shifting the way learners learn collectively, work together, the kind of things like cooperation if you think more to primary school, although it should apply to all of us all the way through healthcare, work together. And so all of those kind of things, how do we start to think about the structural changes that happen with technologies and see what is happening first, and then think about if there are unintended negative effects, which there always are, as well as unintended positive effects. What of those unintended negative effects do we absolutely need to do something about, and what do we then start to do to mitigate those effects? We may have to build something else in to make up for, we get a shortcut in one thing, we may have to add something new to education to make up that difference. So I would look at it structurally more than at the individual reflection level.
Thank you, Cynthia and Nikki. Naomi, go ahead, please.
So I guess my question is along that unintended consequences, and it's probably more directed to you, Cynthia, because everything Nikki says is gospel. So I guess in thinking about like Ursula Franklin and her approach, like one of the unintended effects of the uptick in use of AI is the huge environmental impacts and those effects on humans in healthcare, in the environment. And I guess I'm sort of thinking about how are we thinking about that problem and how it's going to impact healthcare when we all live in drought and, overheat?
Yeah, and that is something that too often gets swept away as, oh, we'll find a technological solution to that. And it's affecting people's health now. I do clinical work in Yellowknife now. The wildfires, you have to wear a mask in Yellowknife out of doors to stop inhaling horrible particles. It is having huge effects on human health. There was an evacuation of the whole city a week after I left, doing a clinical locum there. Years later, patients come in and say, during the evacuation and the effects on their physical and mental health, people got, just put on airplanes without all of their stuff and didn't have their medications and couldn't get, the effects were massive. And that's part of all the environmental effects. Do you want a big data center next door to your house? I sure don't. Where are they getting put? Where people cannot, in places where people don't have the ability to say no. So yes, these are massive. They are part of the technology. And just as Ursula Franklin would say, that is a fundamental part of AI as a technology. So we have to build that in. We can't wait till technology solves the problem. People's health is being affected right now, and we should care about that if we care about people's health.
Thank you both. And I'm just aware of the time. We've run 5 minutes over, but this is what happens when you're having a great conversation. I'd like to thank Cynthia, Nikki, Brianna, and David for making this a wonderful event and thought-provoking conversation. Of course, you can always reach any of them via email, and they're part of our community at UHN and U of T. Once again, thank you to the Hodges Day Committee, Cheryl, and all of you for participating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.